Good evening, everyone, and we're back to continue our study on Habakkuk. We ended yesterday in verse 3, and I guess it caused a little bit of concern for some of you, but it's quite okay. Follow the lesson and how the verses are interpreted, looking at the words in the Hebrew. And at the end of the day, I think it's incumbent on each of us to actually do our homework to come to terms with the text. Once we're clear on the text, then we are able to actually give a better explanation for it. Now, in today's session, we will try to finish as much as we can in this chapter. But there are some challenges because some of these verses are not so easy to translate. So once again, I would like to explain to you that the translation from Hebrew to English is not straightforward at all. And it is a challenge for any translator to translate. And of course, our various English translations have different goals and objectives as to how and why they translate things a certain way, whether they use different texts as well. But for our purposes today, we only work with the Hebrew text, and we will begin in verse 4, right here. As a matter of continuity, I need all of us to remember the background. And in chapter 1, Habakkuk was crying out to God with regards to the Hamas, the injustice, the violence, and they are encompassing and surrounding the righteous, and they're squeezing out the righteous people from the community. And Habakkuk was wondering, why isn't God responding? But little did he realize that God has been around setting the stage. And he mentioned a particular nation called the Chaldeans. And for our purposes today, the Chaldeans are the Babylonians. And with particular reference to the king would be the king of Babylon. And here, when we get into this second segment of chapter 2, we need to be mindful, and again, you need to do your homework. I'm suggesting to you that as we go on, we need to be very careful as to who the text is speaking to and speaking of. Is it speaking of Judah? Is it speaking of the nations of the world? Is it speaking of the Chaldeans? Is it speaking of the king of Babylon? And hence that would help us understand the text. And that's how we would do a proper Bible study, to look very carefully at the context as well as who is speaking and who is it addressing. So the subject and the object are both very important in such a lesson. I have also tried to show you a little bit of how the Hebrew mind works. And yesterday we dealt a little bit about time. What is in front has already happened. What is behind or coming after would be something that will happen later. It hasn't happened yet. So that would be how the Hebrew looks at things. Now in this verse 4, now verse 4 is very important to us, mainly because not only it's in this particular section of Habakkuk, you should also realize that if you have a cross-reference Bible, if you open your Bible to the middle section, you will also find that it is referenced by Paul in Romans chapter 1. It is also referenced by Paul again in Galatians chapter 3. So let me just put this down. Romans chapter 1 in verse 17. Galatians chapter 3. And this one would be in verse 11. And then again, the author to the book of Hebrews also referenced this in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38, which tells us that this book of Habakkuk is important even in the New Testament, because the New Testament writers are constantly referring back to this passage. And so let us take a look at this passage carefully. It says, "Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith." Allow me to help us break this down, because it's not as straightforward as it looks. You can look at all your other translations as well. And let me just briefly point out to you a couple of words. One, the proud. It is not that simple word of being proud. This is in fact a verb. And the verb means she was heedless. Now, what is heedless? Now, if you look at Numbers, and we will be able to see this a lot better in Numbers chapter 14, verse 44. Now, Numbers chapter 14, verse 44 would be a passage where they thought that they could go and fight the Amalekites. And Moses was telling people, don't do that. The Amalekites and the Canaanites, they are very powerful. The people decided that they will go ahead nevertheless, without the Ark of the Covenant, without Moses, and they left the camp and they went against the Amalekites and Canaanites, and hence the word was heedless. They didn't listen to Moses. They couldn't be bothered with the Ark of the Covenant of God, and that is this word here. And heedless is about, in a way, it's like pride. Like, I can do it myself. I don't need God. That kind of an expression. That's how it is defined. And so proud, not in the regular sense of the word, but proud to think that you can do it by yourself. And that's this word proud. Now we have another word, that his soul is not upright in him. So our challenge is this. If this is a feminine word and there's a she, the other word that has a she is this, soul. And this is, and those of you who have been following me, this is nephesh. And it talks about this person whose nephesh is not heeding God's instructions, not heeding what God is saying, and thinking that he can do it himself. That's the picture here about pride. And his nephesh is not upright in him. So let me just share with you this word upright, because it comes from a word that we are all very familiar with. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 6. And so we read in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." Now in verse 6, it says, "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he may make straight your path." And that is this word upright. So one of the things that you're beginning to see is that the English text itself sometimes doesn't help us understand what the underlying text is saying. It may read just fine in the English, but it doesn't express the nuance. And so let me just wrap this up in this statement here. It says, "Behold, she, the nephesh, was heedless, not heeding any advice from God. His nephesh," and we'll talk about his shortly, "is not made straight in him." He doesn't have peace. He doesn't have he doesn't have smoothness in his thoughts. That would be a way of expressing it. And who would he be? I would think that this he would be with reference to the king of the Chaldeans, right? But in general, it's saying that all those who do not heed God, the nephesh, his person, is not going to be smooth inside of him. But the second phrase is equally important. And the just shall live by his faith. And that is also not exactly how the verse is translated. So let me just give you a quick word on this. The just, the righteous, okay? The righteous or the lawful. That is what this word actually means. A just man is one who obeys God's laws, who does what God tells him to do, and that's how we would understand the word just. The righteous, the one who does the right thing, and the right thing will be God's things, right? And then shall live, and he will live, right? He will live, but by his faith may not exactly be accurate. By his faithfulness would be better. His faithfulness to God. So basically what this verse will say is this. In the midst of the society that is now crumbling because of the Hamas, the injustice, the violence, the unrighteousness that's happening, the just are few. So Habakkuk represents the just who still remains loyal to God and is crying out for help. And God is saying, the just shall live by his faithfulness. Regardless of what is happening around them, God will look at us, who are the just, to continue living the way we have always lived by being loyal and faithful to God. That would be how verse 4 is saying. The one who doesn't pay attention to God, heedless, his nephesh is not made level, is not made straight. But the righteous, the one who follow God's laws and his commands, he will continue to live by his faithfulness to God. Now, I think if you take a pause here and you look at this verse, many of you have been asking, in this day and age when things are not happening right and things are not fair, there's injustice, that's exactly how it is in the time of Habakkuk, at the end of the period of the Southern Kingdom era. And so God is saying, whatever happens, the just will continue and must continue to live by God's words, to be faithful and loyal to God. Now that we have crossed this challenging verse, we will go on to the continuing passage, which is in verse 5. And the word he, I would suggest to you, would be the king of Babylon. And this is how the rest of the passage is speaking about. He transgresses by wine. Basically, it says that that the wine is dealing treacherously. Now, we have seen this word before, treacherously. And dealing treacherously with the valiant. Now, let me just pause and explain to you, where did all these words come from? There's nothing here. Well, all I can tell you is this. The word transgress comes from this set of words right here. That the wine is causing the valiant, the warrior, to deal treacherously, to deal deceitfully, because he has been drinking a lot of wine. And again, it continues to describe his character, that he is a proud man. Now, this word proud actually means proud, as we would understand today. He is an arrogant man. That's the same word. So in verse 4, this is not the word proud, although in English it's the same word, but in the Hebrew it's a completely different word. So now speaking about the king of Chaldeans, he is a proud man. He is dealing treacherously. Though he may be valiant, he is going out to conquer, he is affected by wine. He does not stay at home. That's another strange word. And the word home means the place where it is considered a place of beauty, a place of beauty and comfort, I guess. And that would be a home. Now, that is not the normal word called home, but it is describing this, that the place where this person is coming from, it is of beauty, there is comfort, but he doesn't stay there. He doesn't want to stay there. Why? Because he is enlarging his desire as hell. Now, that's another difficult phrase in the English. So let me just break this down. It says that he enlarges, he wants to grow his conquers. Okay, that's what it means. He enlarges. His desire is about enlarging the kingdom, and he wants to enlarge it as wide as, well, this word hell is unfortunate. It's been put in there by the King James, and the New King James continues the tradition to use this word hell. There is no such word there, and in some of your other translations, it would have been much better translated as Sheol. That would be the afterworld that the Old Testament refers to after a person dies. So it says that this king has this desire. He just wants to enlarge his kingdom, just like Sheol is doing so. And so you notice that this is a little bit of a poetic expression. And he is like death. He cannot be satisfied. Satisfied means eat to the full. Which means that the whole expression here tells us that he just wants to keep doing it and there is no stopping it. So there is no satisfaction. That is what it means. Like death. Death keeps happening. And he enlarges his desires as Sheol, because as more and more people die, more and more people are there. So it keeps growing and never shrinks. So what you can see is this is two statements, again, as I mentioned to you, that describes the same idea. He gathers himself all nations. He heaps up for himself all peoples. That's another way of saying the same thing twice, right? All nations. And nations here in verse 5 would be goyim. And all peoples would be These are two Hebrew words that refer to people of the world, the tribes of the world. So when nations are regarded, then Israel is one nation, or Judah is one nation. Egypt or Mitzrayim is another nation. So all nation means they are groups of people that call themselves by particular names, and that would be goyim. Now, in many instances in the Old Testament, the word goyim is used as a reference to all nations who are not Israel. And so in this particular verse 5, the net of it gives us a picture that this king has no satisfaction and he doesn't stay home where it is beautiful and comfortable. He wants to go out and he keeps enlarging his kingdom and he keeps adding more and more people into his kingdom. Now in verse 6, God is now saying, remember, this is what God is saying to Habakkuk. He says, will not all these, who are these? These are the nations, right? These are the nations, following the context. The nations or the peoples. Why don't they say something against him? A taunting riddle against him. Basically, to say things that will mock him. That's the question that is being asked. Why doesn't these people do that? And the answer is actually quite interesting. God is saying, woe to him who increases. These would be the mocking words. Okay. Woe to him who increases. How long? This is how we would understand this segment. He who increases would be the king. Okay. The king is increasing and he's gathering more and more people. How long will it continue? That is the question. Now, this next statement is going to be another play of words. And to him who loads himself with many pledges. Many means a lot. Okay? Pledges means things pawned. That you borrow money from him and you promise to pay him back. Right? These are what pledges means, because it connects to the next verse, which is verse 7. We come to verse 7, and verse 7 has a bit of a challenge as well, but it relates to the many pledges that we were talking about. That this king, him, has actually accumulated a lot of what we call people owing. In terms of pawning. And in verse 7, we read of your creditors. Now, the word creditors actually mean to claim or pay interest. Now, what is important that we can read here is that the phrase here is in a verb. So you will rise up to pay, or they would rise up. And this would not be it would be they. So they would rise up to pay interest, and these are the ones who has given the pledges. And they will rise up suddenly. And this would mean at the wink of an eye. Then it goes to the next one. And will they not awaken? Awaken would mean wake up. Wake up, and it is causing them to tremble. Trembling. And trembling who? You. And you will become their booty. Now, the way to read this is that we need to continually remember that the him and the you is the king. And so this verse 7 talks about the retaliation one day. That those who owe him money, that they have to pay interest, will suddenly, at a wink of an eye, turn around and come and conquer this king or this kingdom. That would be how we would read verse 7. Because you, the king, have plundered many nations, there is a warning given by God. All the remnants of the people shall plunder you, which tells us that the next kingdom that's rising up against Babylon will be made up of the nations that he has conquered, and these will be the people there. And we read of Medo-Persia after this, and they were once part of this kingdom. Okay, because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city and of all who dwell in it, to tell them that this king he's not your friend. He is not your friendly neighbor. He is a very violent man. Right? That's how it is explained here. Verse 9. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. Again, this describes Nebuchadnezzar eventually, which we will find, because the king that attacked Judah was Nebuchadnezzar and not the father, which would be after his father had passed on. So it says in verse 10, you give shameful counsel, shameful advice to your house, cutting off many peoples and sin against your soul. This is a very strange expression. Basically, you have done all these things, and all these result in going against yourself, your own nefesh. And his nefesh is heedless, right? We read it just now. Verse 11. For the stone will cry out from the wall. That's a straightforward thing, that these are the cry for help. The beam from the timber will answer it. This is a bit poetic. Okay, it's talking about voicing out. And these, again, two lines saying the same thing, right? Of being poetic to express their cries, the cries of help. Woe to him, verse 12, who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Again, you would see that there are two lines, and they both say the same thing. Bloodshed very much would be by killing, right? By killing. And by the way, the idea of shedding blood, it is actually an idiom of killing, right? It's just an idiom of killing. And he established towns with wickedness, with unrighteousness, with perverseness, right? With evil. Now in verse 13, behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts? And this one, I think you all should make a mark in your Bibles, because this is a very important word. It is Yehovah Tsavaot, the Lord of hosts. The Lord of hosts is an expression and a name characterizing God having the might and power that commands his army of heaven to go to war against these people. And so in verse 13, it is a reply by God. It is me. And pay attention to what I'm saying now, right? This is how it is expressed. Now, these two lines also say the same thing twice. So I'm just highlighting this to you. There's a lot of these statements, two lines that say the same thing, and they are meant for emphasis. The people's toil. Labor means to toil. And they grow weary. They become exhausted. And what do they do? They work hard, but they feed the fire. They try to satisfy the fire. Now, this is an idiom. And this idiom means whatever you do, the fire will keep burning it out. So it is a never-ending work that they do, and they are exhausted already. Verse 13, the nations are weary. Now we see the word weary, but this weary is another meaning. This weary actually means to tire out. And they are both about the same meaning, but using two words to say the same thing. That they are trying to satisfy in vain, right? In emptiness. That is what it means. Emptiness. Just now was fire. This is emptiness, in vain. Meaning you work so hard and it's going nowhere. So both are idioms to say that the people are just doing things and they're trying to do things which has no effect. And they are getting tired. Now, this next line is what I want all of us to appreciate, right? To appreciate. Verse 14. God is now making a declaration. If we're not aware, this verse here would probably be one of the most important verses in the entire Old Testament as a future declaration of what is going to happen when God is going to take action. And so let me just briefly explain this to you. God is telling us even till today that one day he will make sure that the earth, and by earth, it will be the land will be filled. And the idea of fill is to be full. To be full. With what? With the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. This is an incredible expression that one day the world will know God. Okay, let me just put it down here. One day, the whole world will have knowledge of God. And by doing so, God says, in what way will the world actually know God? And here you see, as the waters cover the sea. It's basically God is saying, one day the whole world will be filled, full of the knowledge of the glory of God, just like water covering the sea. Everywhere, men will know God. And so as I had mentioned to you, put a bookmark there and highlight it in your Bibles, that this is an incredible verse, and that would be the verse that we are looking forward to, that one day the whole world will know God as who he is, as waters cover the sea. Okay, so this is like a little intermission that God is declaring. As much as the people are doing work that is wasted, it's useless, and they're getting tired of it, well, the land will one day be full of the glory, the knowledge of the glory of God. They will know God as you know God. And everyone will come to know God. And that would be the future state. Verse 15 now comes as an expression to describe what the king is doing. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle. Yeah, I think we may have a hard time trying to figure this out in English. The word bottle is a cup. Okay, the word bottle is a cup, a chalice. And the idea here is to feed your neighbor and force him to drink to the point of making him drunk. And God says, woe to him. And the reason why he is doing that is so that he may look on his nakedness, expose his shame. And once a person does that, the one who is holding the cup will be the one who has the power. Verse 16, God is saying, you are filled with shame instead of glory. And the way that you are proceeding to conquer, you also drink from the same cup. And as you drink from this same cup, you are doing things which show that you are uncircumcised. Now, this word is expressed this way. In verse 16, it says, it says it will leave unharvested. You will remain uncircumcised. You will be seen with your foreskin. Now we need to appreciate this idea of circumcision, because in Genesis chapter 17, when God gave this instruction to Abraham and his children to be circumcised, all males, on the 8th day, the king of Babylon will come and expose himself that he is one who is not circumcised. And by that, he will be shown as one who is different from Israel, different from Judah, and also different from the standpoint that he is not one who abides by God's rules. Because circumcision is a sign of the covenant, part of the promise that God made to Abraham to be defined by that mark. And the king is shown as one who has not been circumcised. And so God says, the cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. And these two are also, again, A and B, saying the same thing twice. But let me explain to you the nuance of this. The cup of the Lord's right hand, you need to understand this. The Hebrew language uses body parts quite a lot. The idea of before God literally means to his face or to his faces. Right hand, as it's expressed here, would be authority and might. And the cup of the Lord's right hand and the cup here is matching this cup. Okay? And so, though he may have a cup, the king of Babylon has a cup that he drinks from, but the cup of God's authority is going to be turned against him. And it will be utter shame. This is complete disgrace. Will be his glory. That is what would be seen. That is his weight. Now, so these would be what we would call prophetic words. And right now the king is on his home run. He is powerful, he is conquering. So Babylon is on the rise. And in verse 16, God is saying that one day Babylon will be in utter shame. So that is what we call a prophetic word. Verse 17. For the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of beasts which made them afraid, because of men's blood, and the violence of the land and the city and of all who dwell in it. And the reason why God is executing his power against Babylon will be to punish for these crimes. And that would be God taking action, right, against the king of Babylon. Let us complete this section and we will be done for the day. Verse 18. This is a new section that God is speaking. And in this section, it deals with idolatry. Idolatry. So the king is the one whom God is going to punish. And when you punish the king, you punish the whole kingdom. And the behavior of the king has been characterized in the above verses. But when we come to verse 18 onwards, it describes the idolatry that they themselves are also practicing. And it is also something which Judah has been practicing as well. And so we know now from history that the northern kingdom's downfall was idolatry. And so God allowed the Assyrians to come in to conquer. The southern kingdom is who is being addressed to now, and they too practice idolatry. And God is going to deal with them. Now, God told them in Exodus chapter 20, in what we call the Ten Commandments, that you shall have no other gods before me. You can't have a God to my face. I am a jealous God. Now, all through this period, God has been pleading with them, engaging them, calling them to repent, telling them that he is angry, and so on and so forth. But now in verse 18, towards the end of this message to Habakkuk, God is now telling them these words. What gain that prophet is gain? Okay. What gain is the image? And you must know that these are idols that has a shape and a form. And that's image. We are made in the image of God. That's the same image that we're talking about, right? And in this case, this image is with reference to idols. What gain are idols? That its maker should carve it. Now, all these could be by wood or by stone. And besides wood and stone, there could also be molded images. Molded images. And this would be metal. Now, people in those days already know how to use metals, and they use molds. They make a mold and pour liquid metal. And then once the metal cools down, you get a molded image. Also another idol, right? And they teach lies, untruths. Now, this is metaphorical because images cannot speak. And so whatever is being taught as ascribed to the idols, God is calling them lies, as opposed to truth. And by this, we get the word untruths, deception. And what else do we have? Falsehood. Things that is not true. Things that is completely opposite of God, who is truth, who is true. And so the discipline, the rebuke comes that the maker of its mold should trust in it to make mute idols. Mute idols actually means gods that are speechless. And so they call these gods, and the maker of his most is a human being. And so God says, you make all these things, and they can't speak. And the people who speak on their behalf are also telling lies. Woe to him who says to wood, awake, meaning to call the wooden image, the one that has been carved, to wake up, to the silent stone, the stone that is of this image, that is not saying anything. Come on, I will teach something. How can it teach? That's what God is saying. So you notice once again, A and B saying the same thing twice. It says, behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, yet in it is no breath at all. And by the way, the word breath is wind. Is also translated as spirit. And this is the Hebrew word ruach. And what we can see is this. God is saying, when he made us in Genesis chapter 2, God formed man from the dust of the ground and blew into his nostril the breath of life, and man became a living being. And so there are two parts that mix the appearance of something that is alive. The form and the breath, or the wind, or sometimes you call the spirit. It is something that's inside of man that shows that man is alive. What is external is the image. And so here in this particular verse, it says that these stone images, the wood images, the molten metal images, they may be laid with gold or silver, right here, but there is no wind at all. And the whole aspect is saying that they are not alive. They are dead. And that is the argument that God has placed in there. So let us wrap up the final verse. But the Lord is in his holy temple. I think we could look at this verse this way. First of all, you need to understand that the word translated as temple is also the same word as palace. Now, if you're not aware, you now know. And so, whenever we talk about the temple of God, it is equated as God's throne, where there is the mercy seat. And hence, it is viewed as God's throne and God's palace. And this statement refers to us saying that God, the Lord, is in his temple of holiness. In his temple of holiness. That is what it means. Okay? So this is a call of attention. The Lord is still there. Now, they can't see God. And so God is making a statement. And this would be a statement of fact because God is alive. Not like the molded images. And God speaks. And here lies the contrast between these and God himself. And so the final statement is this: keep silence. Keep silence is be still. Okay? Hold your tongue. That is what it means. Let the land hold your tongue before him. And this is a command to be silent before God, to acknowledge his presence, that he is there, though you can't see him, but God is in his holy temple. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 2.